You know what defines the modern race debate? It's flipping past racism into modern anti-racism while being blinded to how they've just come full circle back to where they started. When that happens, someone like Ben Shapiro, who advocates a colorblind worldview, is just seen as dismissive and blinded by his white privilege. I want you to watch this timeless interaction that catapulted Ben into the spotlight a few years ago, because these few minutes demonstrate exactly where we are going wrong in our conversations around race in America.
According to Pew Research, the net worth of white families in 2013 was $141,000. For black families, it was $11,000, even less than the $19,000 it was in 2007. According to economist Edward Wolf of the University of New York, excluding vehicles and other durables, the median black family worth is just $1,700, while 40% of black families have zero or negative wealth. White family worth, in terms of financial worth, is 69 times more than that of black families. Given this disparity, how can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
So what do I think those riots are? I think they're depravity, I think they're thugs, and I think if you really want to make a difference, Thurgood Marshall, who grew up just 2 blocks from there, did such a thing, who was a contemporary of Martin Luther King.
I look at the Baltimore uprisings as more than just riots, right? I hate the idea when you say thugs and riots, right? White people riot as well. When y'all win Super Bowls 2 years in a row, y'all get off the hook. Don't make it seem like it's just Baltimore getting upset. I feel the frustration of what's happening in the community, and I think it's a symptom. The uprisings are a symptom of a pressure that's been unaddressed for too long.
I'm offended by the language of uprising applied to people who are breaking into other black people's stores and looting them. This is a lack of values. And people who are destroying private property, destroying cop cars, in an uprising against what exactly? Against the black police chief, against a mostly minority police force, against the black mayor, against the black president, against the black attorney general, against against a city council that is 9 of 15 are black and all 15 are elected Democrats. What is the uprising against? What is it seeking to achieve? I still don't see what exactly the riots are seeking to achieve. Bottom line is, it all could be boiled down to just act like a mensch. Act like a human being. Honestly, it's not useful to riot, it's not useful to break things, it's not useful to throw rocks at people. The idea that we're supposed to correlate your level of outrage with a certain level of justification, in other words, the more outraged you are and the more angry you are, the more justified you must be, is absolute nonsense.
Does anyone else see a weird normalization of that in modern America, where looting and riots are almost given a pass if there's a certain kind of political tinge to them? And when it comes to organizations like BLM, the Baltimore uprisings were one of the manifestations of this idea. However, the word uprising is a euphemism because even a cursory glance at the statistics reveals how these riots back in 2015 were only a prelude to what we would see next in 2020. Of the several hundreds of businesses damaged and nearly $9 million worth of property lost to vandalism, a vast majority were actually black-owned businesses who were given no recompense for being caught up amongst the riots. Not just that, over 160 police officers were injured in what were 2 weeks of the most intense racial tensions in the country, triggered by the passing of 25-year-old Freddie Gray in police custody. There's no subject or grievance in modern-day America that justifies taking innocent people's lives and livelihood from them, and especially not violent vandalism that can be hijacked by people using crowd cover to rob and steal, knowing they'll likely be let off the hook. But that's only one aspect of the race debate concentrated around individual incidents. What's truly breeding resentment in modern America is the conflation between inequity and injustice. In simple terms, there's people today standing at the finish line of the race of life and screaming injustice when and not everybody reaches it at the same time. In this race, every obstacle along the way, every struggle, and every standard that people have to meet starts to be misconstrued as oppressive and racist. In fact, that's where the term institutional racism comes from in the first place. And what happens when you popularize this resentful idea and drill it into the minds of millions of people? You leave them no other choice than to tear down the entire institutions that they've been told are racist. The result of that is they see every truly colorblind system that stops short of it as standing to protect the status quo instead of helping tear down and rebuild it. Ben Shapiro himself made this truth abundantly clear after the recent saga around former Harvard president Claudine Gay, writing on X, and I quote, "This is the essence of DEI, the accusation that colorblind systems are in fact racist if the outcome of those systems is bad for victimized groups. Thus, plagiarism standards, SATs, free speech, property rights, it's all racist."
When there is no evidence of racism, it's probably not racism. When there is actual evidence of racism, it's probably racism. And the fact that everybody jumps from there's inequality and therefore there is inequity, just because there's inequality does not mean there was inequity.
But there has to be racism. You can't say there's no racism.
Without evidence?
No. I'm just saying that I don't know which animal. Maybe we're talking about dogs or something. I'm talking about human beings, and I'm like, human beings are most likely going to have racial prejudices. I'm just so sorry. I'm just so sorry. I don't know. I come from planet Earth.
Charles, I want to ask you a question. So your default is that when there is no evidence, racism is the deciding factor. That is
no, I was not saying that. I'm just saying that you're going to have sexists, you're going to have racists, you're going to have all this stuff. I mean, I'm just saying that.
I agree it exists, but the problem that I'm seeing, and this is the problem with the general conversation, is that there's no solution in simply saying there's racism out there. How does that solve anything? I mean, when you talk about there's institutional racism, what does that mean? Show me a law that is racist in intent, and we will agree. Show me a police officer who commits a racist act like we saw in South Carolina, right, where a police officer shot a black man running away and it was obviously unjustified, and I will agree. But you need, the idea that you can craft a narrative based on no racism because it just must be somewhere out there in the ether, that doesn't solve problems for anybody and creates more problems for people because now they grow up in a milieu and an environment where they are told that every obstacle they face is from some shadowy, nameless, faceless group who's out to get them simply because of the color of their skin. They'll never succeed in that environment.
You know, the weirdest thing is that actually in the black home, as I experienced it, really, there is no discussion of racism. Racism actually is a discussion that you actually come out and you face in the public because it's a real thing that you have to actually expect. I mean, if you're silly and you're foolish if you don't really think that that's going to be there and encountered in the real world. I'm sorry, this is just a fact of life. But if I'm at home and having dinner with my father or whatever, we don't go, oh my God, this society is so racist as I'm eating my steak, and you know what I mean? Oh goodness gracious! Oh, I can't bear it. My black skin's causing. I mean, no, we don't talk like that. Actually, we don't talk like that. We talk about, my God, Aunt, what's her name? Oh my God, she's got to take some pills because she's off the register. I mean, it's just like, these are the conversations we have at home. We don't have these kinds of conversations that we're having right now. At least in my childhood, we didn't have them. And I'm watching the people I knew growing up in the black neighborhood, I didn't hear anybody really talking about race when we were at the dinner table. I mean, it just didn't really pop up, unless it was an issue that was on television, but mostly it was about family and regular life.
And that anecdote is what should inform him on the larger debate. The burden of evidence is not on the person asking for it, but on the person asserting that society and institutions are structurally and irredeemably racist. The existence of racism is not the default starting point, and when you pair that with a complete willingness to fight against a racist incident, if it is articulated into a case for it, that's how you root out the scourge of racist ideas from every nook and corner of society. Ben Shapiro's great at this because the demand for the specificity in the institutional racism debate is often enough to disarm most such accusations, and you often realize the idea is just a crutch. It's critical to separate the racism debate into the past versus today, because of course things like segregation, different property rights, and Jim Crow laws of the past were a major institutional obstacle for many minority groups in the country. But in a society that has gone farther than any other to make amends for it, even to the point of overcorrection, it is individual action that empowers you above any unnamed institution or invisible structure. Even more so than that, the instance on seeing a race element in every inequity or injustice can actually undo many of the strides we've made to come this far. It pits races against each other, reignites bigotries of the past, and lands us back to square one every time. That's why individualizing and particularizing racist incidents is very critical.
But I disagree. I have to tell you, even in my culture, there is an underlying racism. And I know that the panel today, and especially with what's going on in America, we're talking about white on black. But I cannot wake up in the morning and not think about, interculture racism, okay? I'm not Mexican enough. Why? Because I'm articulate and because I have straight hair and I can wear high heels. I don't have a tattoo on my neck. Yes, there is a huge problem with racism, no matter if you're light-skinned or dark-skinned. Absolutely, there is interculture racism. It's absolutely underlying. And while you may not talk about it, your grandmother will have the favorite grandkid. If she's the lightest one with the good hair, that becomes the favorite grandkid in our culture. And that's, unfortunately, even within our own cultures, we tend to look upon, the color of each other's skin and how much education we have. And if my uncle has done time in jail, which, he has, then he becomes more Mexican than I am. What is up with that? I mean, it's sad, but it's true. It's absolutely true. It's like I can't eat spicy picante sauce, so I'm not Mexican enough. It's true, in every culture, whether it's Asian, black, Mexican, there is, while you may not have grown up talking about it over your, tea and toast.
I mean, in my family, if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, you're not Jewish.
You're not Jewish enough.
That part is true. This entire time, I've been trying to think about your initial question about disparities. Are they automatically tied to race? And at first, I think all of us were stumped because we were trying to think of the instances. I do agree that they are separate, that they don't necessarily correlate within itself. There are disparities. NAACP, we are the experts inside of the nation of bringing in the racial lens for all of the work. No, they're not necessarily going hand in hand, or they're not necessarily tied to each other. That's how I would answer it. No, they don't have to go together. My job as a civil rights attorney is to be able to make you see race at every given opportunity, but no, it's not present in each and every single disparity. To your second...
What are the standards? What are the standards, the difference? I mean, you said that you want people to see race in every single... When do you decide something racist has occurred? Because if you have just a statistical disparity, has an act of racism automatically occurred? That was David's basic question, I think.
The answer to that question is intent. Racial injustice, when it's done intentionally, makes everyone in modern America firmly stand on the side of the victim. But that doesn't mean that racist intent can simply be assumed by looking at one-dimensional statistics and the inequalities we see. That's done more to turn away people than get them on our side. On top of that, assuming bad intent also sees the worst in people, often on the basis of race itself, only serving to fuel more racism. That's why the charge of racism today has become a smear that can be thrown around at anyone without understanding the true weight of this accusation. Kind of like the boy who cried wolf, it desensitizes people to the charge and eventually does more to harm the social justice cause than help it. In the end, it's all about establishing the right starting point of the debate and agreeing on what is the default on this issue, recognizing that America in 2024 is vastly different from America of the 1800s, is the beginning of a more productive race conversation.